Hello everybody who watches my channel. This is sort of an informal video about why I think, or how I theorize, why there were so few archers in Greece. Why were they not more emphasized like they were in the Orient? And the reason is a little bit complex, a little simple, it's very straightforward, also very not, it's a complicated topic. But we can go kind of into the literature here and kind of pick out reasons why, and also look at the functions of an archer and what makes them effective and what makes them ineffective in some areas. So if we go back into time, we look at Attic vase paintings of the geometric period, archers are pretty synonymous with figures of warriors on vases. You usually will find an archer somewhere in most depictions. So this was definitely a geometric thing, and that's kind of why I'm sort of dressed up in archaic geometric kind of attire, you know, the tunic, a Mycenaean tunic with sleeves to it, which is kind of unheard of in later Greece, especially towards the south. You basically see archers wear armor, you see archers very consistently in battle, sometimes they even have shields, so it's very complicated at the time. And we have to go by with what Thucydides says in his very admirable attempt at reconstructing the history of early Greece. Basically between the time of the Trojan War and between his day, which was the late 5th century, there was a very common practice for armies of a city-states or of a tribe or some sort of social group that spoke Greek or whatnot, basically foraging, going about and doing all these things. And what this is that it led to a culture of armed robbery, piracy, war bands, where it's a bunch of poor aristocratic warriors. I know that sounds like an oxymoron, but you know, an aristocrat could actually be basically impoverished relative to another time period where their land is more rooted and whatnot, and you have clearly defined boundaries and you have clearly defined wealth acquisition. But basically what these Greeks did is that they went out to war in order to make money. They're like the gangstas of their day. They're going out, they're killing men if they have to. It's not required, but they kill men, they make money, and they fuck bitches. That's basically what they did, because to them, women were also wealth, and that's a pretty horrifying thing to think about. We never go back to those times, thankfully. And they would do this in order to, as Thucydides states, to support their own wealth as well as to support the poor among them. So what they were doing is taking the wealth that they steal from this other group of people, this other state, and if they happen to kill people in battle, they can just strip the armor and the weapons off of them. So it was a very might makes right kind of world. It was a world where it was all about your ability to commit violence is how you make your money. It's how you make your day. People who are pledge their loyalty to you and you win a battle, if you're their social leader, you're their king or their war leader or just some sort of aristocratic farmer that took his farm hands across the border and go, you know, mess some guy's shit up over there and then stole his wealth, you would divide that wealth among your warriors who followed you, and that's how you gained their loyalty. This is also kind of mimicked in Roman history as well, at least according to Livy. When Romulus and Remus were in charge back in the first kings of Rome, there were warband leaders. They took a bunch of shepherds, people who were farmers, and went and plundered other states, stole cattle, stole all this other stuff that they needed in order to live, basically. This is important because as people are impoverished, you find that if they're impoverished, they have less armor. The less armor they have, the more you rely on missile weapons. And it just so happens to be that one of our best sources on archaic warfare, that's Bill Dyke, in a post on Reddit once said that most scholars believe that the Iliad itself is roughly descriptive of contemporaneous warfare. So it's not Bronze Age period conflict. It is actually more descriptive of 8th century, 7th century conflict and how they fought battles. What are the characteristics of this battle? Well, it's people in various levels of armor. Usually they'll hone in on the most lavish pieces of armor. The social leaders, because that's usually the people who are characterized. They have some kind of shield, and they throw spears. Yes, they actually throw spears. You could use spears in melee, but if you're using a spear, most of the time it's going to be thrown in the Iliad. Usually they carry 2 spears, and this is actually kind of corroborated by geometric vase paintings where they have 2 spears on them. Higi vase, which is a little bit later, a 7th century vase found in Etruria, shows hoplites carrying 1 spear overhead and then holding another spear in their offhand, you know, somewhere over here, perhaps where they're holding their shield. What we're looking at is warband tactics involved small groups of men, 1,000 at most, getting together, plundering a region, and then formulating tactics to either keep that wealth or to fight other people who come to take it back. A lot of that will involve throwing javelins. We'll also find is that a select number of archers would be among them, usually fighting alongside the most armored one for some much needed missile support. One would think that, why don't they also go into battle with armor? Well, it's also about how they formulated the tactics at the time. So if you have front fighters standing kind of loosely apart and going all around like this, and maybe they have armor, maybe they don't have armor, maybe the armored men are sort of towards the front, you carry 2 spears usually. Let's just assume for a second that you can carry 2 spears, or let's say a maximum of 3 if you don't have a shield, right? So you have, at that point, you're on the front and you have 3 opportunities to hit 3 men in front of you. You could miss them. It's very easy to miss with a javelin because generally throwing a javelin is very telegraphed, so it's very easy for somebody to avoid and put their shield up. And then you have 2 other opportunities. Maybe you miss another time, maybe it hits somebody's shield and it glances off, or maybe you finally actually hit somebody and it penetrates their armor. There, you wounded him. He may not be dead, but he's at least out of the fight. He's retreating and whatnot. At that point, you can do either one of 2 things. If you're heavily armored and you have a shield, you can pull your sword out and then try to fight somebody in melee, so you're actually starting to get in close to somebody, assuming that you have armor, and the most heavily armored people would have generally the confidence to be able to do this, so they're getting into the gap between the 2 armies. Although that's not to say that anybody without armor, that's not to say that they couldn't also melee as well. So if you're like me, who is lightly armed, as in I have no shield, and lightly armored, so I'm not really a panoplyte, but if I do have a sword, which we do see some archers do carry swords, that alone is not going to mean that I can't fight somebody in melee. Archers, on the other hand, which for some reason people like to think that archers were absent in archaic Greece. They were not. In fact, if anything, they would have been more emphasized in this early form of Greek warfare because, one, wealth disparities were much worse in the archaic period, so you had the aristocratic farmers with various levels of armor. The most armored person is a rarity. It's not the most common thing to see. You might have a helmet, you might have a shield, you may have some limited armor. So how do archers fit into this case? Well, all we have to really do is look at somebody like Teucros. There was a particular moment in the Iliad where he used his bow alongside with the cover of his brother, Aias, who was his half-brother. And what Teucros did is that he, took down multiple named Trojans very quickly in very short succession. And that's because archery compared to javelin throwing is much quicker. It can be more precise because you can actually precisely aim your arrow. You can actually potentially be able to target small gaps in armor of unsuspecting enemy soldiers. So let's say, if this spear was the equivalent of a friend of mine, right, and I'm kind of hiding behind them, what I'm actually doing is using that cover and that concealment to be able to sharpshoot some people. So Greek archers were the equivalent of sharpshooters in this case, and they're very close range sharpshooters. So in this case, I'm looking around, I'm doing it down like this. I see somebody's leg. I notice that his leg is exposed or his ankle is exposed, and he's close enough that I'm pretty certain I can hit it. Now, this may seem kind of strange to you, but it's a small target. You aim for center mass. Well, we're not working with firearms here. We're working with bows and arrows. All right, so if they're covered, if you have the mind to hit somebody's unarmored parts, you would try to take that. Being able to have the mind of picking out small targets and shooting at them, especially from the ranges that we're seeing, because it seems like hoplites and archers actually fought in the same distance as each other in the geometric and archaic period, because again, this was mainly a missile exchange between javelins and archers. So in this case, like say I find somebody there and I shoot, and I'm able to get either their leg because their leg was exposed and they were distracted with another person that they were trying to skirmish over here. Look, somebody's kind of neck seems exposed. They don't have their Corinthian helmet here. Oh, okay, I'm gonna shoot him. I'm gonna aim specifically for his neck, and maybe I miss, maybe I hit. All right, but here's another thing. Compared to a javelin thrower, they may be able to do this, but they have 3 opportunities to do it if they can't find any other anything else to pick up off the ground. Like if there's not another javelin that they can pick up, then they have essentially 3 opportunities. An archer with a quiver has, let's say like maybe 24 arrows, 30 arrows, something like that. That is 30 opportunities to be able to hit a target. It's not a kill shot, maybe it's not the most powerful thing ever, but you have a combination of 3 things. You have more ammunition than a javelin thrower would. You have the ability to be very precise. Number 2, because you can aim your arrow better than you can aim a javelin. You have the ability to be very quick with it, because you can load arrows very quick. And if you had, say, like bow hand grips like this, you can take an arrow out, shoot, take an arrow out, shoot, right? So those are 2 things, or 3 things that we're seeing. So you have speed, accuracy, and efficiency, and as well as, like I said, the number of arrows that you carry. So basically you have more mini spears. Because they're smaller, you can carry more. If you have a quiver, you can carry more than a javelin thrower would. It's based on efficiency here. It's not going to be the deadliest thing ever, but if you can hit a bunch of people, if you have 30 opportunities to hit people in the shoulder at a single time, or in the leg at some sort of exposed part, or even taking out the non-armored people, like lightly armored people like myself, then that is something that bows are really good at doing, right? And you can do that even more. I would even go as far as to say that archers could have been some of the most effective soldiers on the field if they are deployed correctly. And even sometimes those hoplites can be archers themselves. Now, we have to think, these people went out hunting sometimes. They would have had bows to hunt, and they also hunted with spears. So the stuff that you use to hunt is also the stuff that you use to kill other people as well. Say, for example, that you're an aristocratic farmer, you're a landowner, and like what Thucydides says, that you're carrying your everyday weapons, because he thinks that that was a pretty common thing to be doing in Greece's early history. So people carried their weapons on their day-to-day person, like a dagger, like a bow, like a sling, and all that stuff. And the first thing that you do is, I see enemy soldiers coming from a distance, I'm going to use missile weapons first and foremost. That's the first thing I'm going to be using. I use a sling, I use a bow and arrow, I use javelins, anything like that, just to defend my everyday person, because you had to be ready at all costs. At any time of the day, you had to be ready. So sometimes you can even have all of these while you're just busy herding your sheep, while you're busy cow herding, getting your crops out. I see enemies coming this way, I already have my weapons on me, I'm ready to go. And let's say, for example, if you needed to mobilize a larger response from the rest of the city-states, get like 500 men going, the warlord or the king gets out the call, starts leading the war party. The locals would be like, okay, so we've got a bunch of spearmen here, but we definitely need that advantage of speed, efficiency, maybe less firepower, but definitely accuracy, and we need somebody with more ammunition. Everybody has the ability to pull bows and all that stuff, regardless of how heavy the bow is, because most of us go hunting and all that stuff just to be able to provide for ourselves. Alcibiades, why don't you bring your hunting bow with you, and then maybe like 1 piece of armor. Don't worry, we'll protect you with our armor and all that stuff. Of like 10 people, you'd probably have 1 archer. The abilities of an archer is that because they can carry more ammunition and have more opportunities to wound more people at a single time, it just has to do with how much ammunition they have in their abilities. They don't need that many archers at a single time, because a single archer can theoretically take out, however many men that their quiver capacity has. And a javelin thrower, if you carry 2 javelins on your person, that's 2 opportunities, theoretically a maximum of 2 men at a single time that you can take out with this as your missile weapon. And then you would have to force a melee if you wanted to continue going further. So basically, archers just have a lot more ammunition and a lot more opportunities to actually hit people, that you could justify, having a limited role in the field, because that one person, that one limited role, has more effect than just a bunch of people shooting arrows all at once. You just get in really close, you pick very finely pointed targets, and you just keep repeating and doing that. And even if you miss a couple times, you still have more opportunities to hit somebody with a missile weapon, with a bow and arrow, than you do with a javelin, or heck, even with a sling. Your slings really need a lot of distance for them to be very useful. In summary, archers were not more emphasized because they didn't need to be more emphasized. Archaic and geometric hoplites and spearmen were, kind of both. Sometimes they carry both spears and bows, if the Iliad is to be believed. Sometimes they bring their spears one day, and then for like the next day, they'll grab their hunting bows and go and raid something else, or go and surprise somebody. more multidimensional than we kind of give them credit for, it seems. For example, in the Iliad, Odysseus does not bring his famed bow into battle with him initially, so he is choosing instead to be a spearman, somebody who throws a spear and has a shield. But when a scouting mission was needed and he decides to volunteer for it, what he does is he borrows the bow of Meriones, goes on this scouting mission for it. So people can be spearmen one day, and if you're a trained archer, you can be a spearman, you can be an archer on another day. It's the same with Teucros. If his bowstring snaps and he doesn't have enough time to be able to put another string on, what he does is he gets a spear and starts throwing it, right? Because this is very low-hanging fruit. Spear throwing is very easy to grasp. Literally anybody can do it. It makes no sense not to do it. The Trojan prince Alexander, also better known as Paris, carries a spear, actually primarily carries a spear, has his bow on his shoulder. Dolan carries a spear and a bow simultaneously. Chromahoi, or front fighters, are not associated with one particular type of fighting, all right? They're not associated with being spearmen. They're associated with being the people on the front lines shooting at a single time, all right? Whether they're shooting or whether they're throwing spears, that's what a front fighter is.